This video will compare two cabinets built 23 years apart. One as a beginner, built for my final school exams, and the other as a professional, built for a high-end client. This comparison raises the question, have I actually learned anything, or has this just been a massive waste of time? And seeing that time travel isn't a thing yet, I put my ever-growing YouTube budget to use and hired a reenactment actor to play the part of 16-year-old me. Spoiler alert, after 150 hours and almost a perfect school project, they still failed me. Now, the cabinet that young me is building is a roll-top desk. This is a piece I made for my final year of school over 20 years ago, so I've actually documented this entire process with photos. Old me is building a 1950s style cabinet for a client, and these two cabinets have quite a bit in common. Both traditional designs, both have tambour doors, both use similar methods of construction, and both have an annoying amount of drawer boxes. These similarities will really help to compare the difference between a beginner and an experienced woodworker. And one of the very first things I can see is the level of effort that goes into material selection. It's important to spend time figuring out what board goes where due to its colour and grain. You want the best, most consistent looking boards to go in areas that are seen the most. 16-year-old me would just choose whatever was around, not thinking how it would look in the end, but old me knows that detail is the mark of an experienced maker. The material that I'm using for my 1950s cabinet is walnut, and I'll be adding some brass a little later on. A big thank you has to go to Britain Timbers for supplying the walnut for this cabinet. I'll leave their website below if you want to find out more about what they do, as well as different timber species. As I mentioned, I built the roll-top desk for my final school exams. Here in Australia, this is called the HSC. I believe it's like the A-levels in the UK or a high school diploma in the US and Canada. With practical subjects, you actually start the year before your final exams, obviously because it takes time to build things. In fact, this roll-top desk took 150 hours. Not bad for a beginner, but not so good as a professional. But I guess that would all be a waste of time because in the end, the HSC markers wanted to give me a big fat 0. One of the obvious differences between young me and old me is the available tools. As a beginner, I didn't have the expensive tools I own now. Back then, I relied solely on tools borrowed from my dad and my grandfather, or ones that I'd saved up for myself. You see, I started woodworking at 8 years old, and I wasn't really into toys or whatever other 8-year-olds were into. My favourite place was always the hardware store, where I'd collect catalogues and circle the tools I dreamed of owning. So these days, I feel grateful to have pretty much everything I need, except for maybe this, and this, oh, and these, and maybe this. Okay, so not much has changed. Now, I will admit that I wasn't really looking forward to building this walnut cabinet. After all, it's a little hard to get excited about pieces that aren't new or challenging. I've done these processes many times throughout my career, so the basic nature of this cabinet wasn't really sparking much excitement. What I didn't realise is I was taking a lot for granted at this point. That was until I saw this video from YouTuber Robin Lewis Makes about understanding Bloom's complicated drawer runner instructions.
I don't know if I'm missing some of the instructions, but this doesn't explain anything. This LW-75 is not actually -75, it's -75. In my mind, it was saying LW needs to be 75 millimeters, and I didn't have any clue what that meant.
Now, I truly respect Robin's honesty here. I have to admit that seeing this video brought me back to reality, as I personally had the exact same confusion when I first encountered these instructions. And I'm sure a lot of you did too. In fact, that same confusion goes for almost every other thing in woodworking. What glue should I use, and how much? How do I cut this piece, and what the hell is this? Robin's video reminded me that when you do something for long enough, you forget what it was like to start. That's when I realised that there's nothing simple about this cabinet. Yes, I've done each of these processes before, but this guy hadn't, and he had to learn the hard way. I guess we don't know how far we've come until we stop and look back on what we've learned. I would suggest going and checking out Robin's channel, as he's documenting his process from part-time woodworker to full-time furniture maker. Before I can begin assembling the cabinet, I need to create the channel that my tambour door is going to slide in. It's going to be way easier to do this before everything is together. Plus, I want to try something that I haven't done before, which is a little experimental, but in my head, it makes sense. Looking back on my photos, I was reminded of trying to do this at 16, and I remember making a huge mistake. These photos right here are the uprights for the roll-top desk, where the tambour door will slide along. And if you look carefully, you can see that these are solid wood panels, but the finished product is actually veneered MDF. Back then, I didn't know much about how to mill material properly. I didn't know much about board placement, and I didn't know how to glue wide panels together properly. This inexperience turned a vital component that needed to be flat into a piece that looks more like a banana, which means the tambour door will either bind or fall out of the track as you try to open it. So I had to make the painstaking decision to throw out the solid wood panels and continue with veneered MDF, as that was the only option I could see at the time. This is the part that I haven't ever tried before. I'm using a smaller router bit to route out the channel on the front of the cabinet, giving me a 10mm wide groove, while the rest of the channel is 12mm wide. The reason for this is I want the front of the tambour door, when closed, to look dead straight. Sometimes you can find if the track is too big, then the tambour can wave in and out slightly, which will be super noticeable with this cabinet. So the 10mm channel will hold the tambour in a straighter line. But this tighter groove around the rest of the channel can result in the tambour binding, especially around the corners. So the 12mm wide groove achieves this. Then of course I need to run another channel that allows me to insert the tambour door even once the cabinet is together. Even though there's lots of things that young me has learnt over the years, old me is still learning and changing up the way I generally do things. I mean, usually I wouldn't apply a finish before assembling a cabinet that still has a ton of work left, as I've found that you can run the risk of minor damages as the build continues. But I also hate having to set up draw runners, only to have to take them off again to apply a finish. So this time I decided to make this process a little easier and finish before glue up. To be honest, I've never had a right way or wrong way to do things. I've always just done what works best at the time, and in this scenario, pre-finishing was the way to go. Or so I thought. What I didn't realise is this new finish that I'm using would cause some major issues later on. Once again, Robin's comment was a real turning point in my overall view of this piece. What I originally thought of a boring project was now an exciting opportunity to teach my amazing patrons over on Patreon the basics of cabinet making. I started this build over 2 months ago and have since uploaded 18 update videos and quick tip videos showing off each different step of the way. Not to mention a detailed 55-minute video all about how to create perfect tambour doors, from milling components to proper sizing and running samples. I also have a 40-minute review video of this cabinet where I discuss the design concepts and explain all the different features. And you can also get the 6-part, 4.5-hour extended cut version of this cabinet with no voiceover or music, plus nearly 30 other detailed videos about woodworking and running a business. I know that sounds like a lot, but that's because I post 2 videos per week plus 1 long-form video per month. And we're just about to start the next project, which is also for this client, although this one's a little more out there. So if you're interested in following along as the build happens, or if you just want to check out the hundreds of other videos, I'll leave some links below. And as always, a huge shout out has to go to all these amazing patrons. Like with any process in woodworking, there's a number of different materials and glues you can use to complete the job. One glue that I'll always hate using is contact glue. It's messy, it stinks, and it's not exactly the strongest option for creating a tambour door. But in my opinion, the other alternatives create potential for issues. PVA, for example, is a water-based glue and would be a better option for strength purposes, but it will reintroduce water into the tambour slats. And we want these slats to be as stable as possible, which takes a long time. In fact, the milling footage you just watched was the very first stage of this entire walnut cabinet. I actually took around 4 or 5 weeks to bring them to size, so the last thing I want to do is add a water-based glue to the stable wood. But I have 23 years of proof that contact glue works, as the tambour door on the desk is still holding up perfectly. Even though the roll-top desk was the first challenging piece of furniture that I'd ever attempted, I'd already been interested in woodworking since I was 8 years old, building smaller pieces and experimenting with ideas and techniques. It was thanks to my grandfather, an incredibly talented woodworker, who introduced me to this craft, so no doubt I already had some experience under my belt by the age of 16. Not to mention the fact that I had a wealth of knowledge just a phone call away. So I can understand that at that age I was a little further along than most other beginners. One thing that really helped was the support and encouragement that I not only got from my parents, but also my woodworking teacher, Mr. Gibbs, who understood my passion for woodworking throughout the years of high school. And if it weren't for this support, I may not have been allowed to start this project in the first place. This is why supporting one another is important. You never know what someone might say or do that could affect one's trajectory. Although unfortunately, Mr. Gibbs would eventually prove that you can't always rely on your support network. One of the key design elements to this walnut cabinet is a seamless transition from the tambour door to the drawer fronts, but this isn't as easy as it sounds. You see, a tambour door has to have rounded corners in order for the door to slide open and closed. But unfortunately, these rounded corners would interrupt that seamless transition I'm after. So I've had to create a filler piece that not only hides the curvature of the tambour door, but also carries the grain from the drawer fronts. Now, in order to achieve this, I've had to do something that may send me back to the woodworker's naughty corner, something that will most likely piss off a lot of you professionals. But this shows that there is something that I still have in common with my younger self, and that's experimenting. I've always loved being able to try different ways of doing things, and to be fair, as this comparison continues, I am noticing more similarities between the past and present. I mean, the core reasons to why I love woodworking is still certainly there, but now there's a bit more patience and care behind the decisions. What started out as impulsive curiosity has slowly turned into more thoughtful experimentation, which still means that sometimes you have to break the rules, which, like I said, might annoy some of you purists out there. So I want you to pay close attention to this filler piece and see if you can figure out the things that I shouldn't be doing here. Now, I thought I'd actually stop and explain what it is that I'm doing here, because I'm sure a lot of you have just seen me do something that I probably shouldn't be doing. And that is adding some veneer onto some solid wood in the wrong grain direction. And I've only veneered it to one side. This is kind of breaking all the rules of veneer, but in this scenario, I feel like it's actually going to work quite well. And the reason for that is this piece here is what's going to hide the gap between the drawer fronts and the tambour door. Now, the drawer fronts run in a horizontal grain direction, and if I were to make this entire piece out of some solid wood in that grain direction, it's quite weak. So having the grain run in the opposite direction is going to provide the rigidity that I need. And also, by the time I'm done with this piece, there really isn't going to be too much left. There's actually going to be quite a steep angle cut onto this piece, minimizing more of the material. Not to mention the fact that I've carefully selected this material to ensure that it is quarter sawn. So that means there's going to be even less movement out of it. Now, yes, I've only veneered one side, and technically you should always add a backing veneer to something to help balance it out. But this is actually going to get glued to the uprights, which means there's going to be more than enough support to stop this thing from warping. Yes, this is a little bit experimental, but sometimes it's okay to break the rules and experiment with things. I'm very confident that this is going to work, and if it doesn't, I'm kind of screwed because I need this veneer to match up with the grain on the drawer fronts. Okay, so let's get back into the build. I've had to cut a steep angle to the back side of the filler piece to allow the tambour door to easily move past it. As you can see, quite a lot of material had to be removed, which is why I wanted this component out of solid wood. Now, unlike other pieces that I built in the past, the design of this cabinet is a little more subdued. No over-the-top design elements, which is why I wasn't too excited about starting it in the first place. But as this piece comes together, I'm starting to realize that this is actually up there with one of my favorite builds ever. I'd love to know what you think. Do you want to see more relatable, subdued designs like this cabinet, or more over-the-top designs like these? Let me know at the end of the video. Speaking of which, I have some of my pieces available at Lura Fine Woodwork Gallery, and I'll leave a link below which shows available works and how to inquire. Now, it is simplicity that's key to this design. It's subtle details like the tambour door and the walnut and brass legs that make this cabinet stand out. But one of the other key details are the custom finger pulls. I've always loved trying to figure out creative solutions to a challenging problem. There's no better feeling than being able to see a completed project sitting in front of you that at one point only existed on paper. Unfortunately, for this guy, that feeling didn't last very long. You see, back when I was doing my HSC, you were allowed to build your project at school or at home, and seeing as though I had a decent enough setup in my parents' garage, as well as the fact that I also wanted to build on weekends, I built most of the roll-top desk at home by myself, which proved to be a problem when it came time for my piece to get graded. All student pieces were displayed at school for the HSC markers to inspect and grade according to their marking criteria. There were a lot of great works that year by some talented students, ones that scored fairly well. But I guess based off the quality of my desk, as well as the fact that I built the majority at home, the HSC markers decided to fail me because they didn't believe I built it. My first reaction was shock. I couldn't believe that over 150 hours of work was down the drain. My second reaction was, that's actually kind of cool. I mean, what a compliment. But thanks to Mr. Gibbs, as well as my parents who were called in for an interview, they could prove that based on previous years of school grades, as well as my past projects, that I had a decent amount of knowledge and skill to accomplish a desk like this. And eventually the HSC markers changed their mind. I'm grateful for the fact that the markers reassessed their decision, but this wasn't the first time that I had people doubt me about this desk. Believe it or not, I actually had someone try to stop me from building it in the first place. Unlike the roll-top desk that sits hard on the floor, this walnut cabinet has a traditional 1950s style leg design, which is challenging because the shape of the leg needs to be cut from a rectangular block, but the bottom of the leg needs to be turned on my lathe in order to create a tenon for this brass round tube to fit over. Once I get the perfect fit, I can use some epoxy to glue on the brass. Then once dried, I can take the leg back to the lathe to easily smooth out the transition from brass to wood. This also allows me to sand the brass to 180 grit, giving me that brushed brass look, while also giving this spray lacquer something to bite onto. I mentioned earlier that I almost didn't even start this desk. You see, back then, as far as I'm aware, online woodworking plans weren't really a thing. If you wanted plans, you got them from a catalogue like this. You'd select what project you wanted to make, send in a check, and in a couple of weeks you'd receive the plans in the mail. In my case, the woodworking store that sold the plans was a short drive away, so Mum and I went to go pick them up. We met the owner, purchased the plans, and came straight back home where I took ownership of the dining table to begin figuring out where to even begin building this thing. While this was happening, Mum received a call from the shop owner we just met, expressing his concern. He thought this was far too complicated for a beginner like me and stated that he would be more than happy to return the money or swap the plans for something a little more achievable. Mum's response is one that I'll never forget. She kindly said, "You don't know my son." In all honesty, I can understand this guy's concern and can also appreciate his offer to swap or refund the plans, but I've often wondered whether or not it was the right thing for him to say. Thankfully, I had someone to support me, and realistically I'm stubborn enough to not have listened in the first place. But I do wonder how many people out there may have been talked out of achieving something based on someone else's opinion. Now, there is one last important detail to this story that may have given the store owner reason to have concern. But out of that big book of plans, the project I chose was one of the only ones that was a drawing and not an actual photograph, presumably because it hadn't been built before. But I'd love to know what you think about this. Should he have said anything? Could a comment like that stop someone from trying something new and reaching their full potential? This wasn't the first or last time someone didn't take me seriously. My entire apprenticeship was filled with moments like this. Even when I started this very business, I had older woodworkers telling me not to do it. I guess all you can do is trust in yourself and embrace those that are supportive. But in one last dramatic turn, this roll-top desk would prove that sometimes even your supporters can cause damage. After building the roll-top desk, my confidence was at an all-time high. I'd just completed the most difficult piece I'd ever done, plus we were about to finally graduate and I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to finish school, I couldn't wait to start my next project, and although nervous, I couldn't wait to start my apprenticeship. I remember coming into school on one of the very last days ever, only to have one of my woodworking classmates run up to me saying that someone had dented my desk, and I was furious. All this hard work for someone to carelessly dent the piece that I dedicated so much time towards. As I quickly rushed to see the state of the damage, I bumped into Mr. Gibbs, who clearly had something he needed to tell me. "Nick," he said, "I'm so sorry, but I accidentally dropped another project on your cabinet." Then he offered all the different ways I could try and fix it. Now, how can you be mad at someone who's been so supportive? Plus, it was an accident, and accidents happen. And out of pure laziness, I never actually fixed the dent, which I'm glad I didn't, because I think it adds to the whole story of the piece. With the legs complete, I'm finally on the home stretch for this walnut cabinet, but there was one part that I was putting off up until now, because I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to create the internal cabinet. This is the part that's going to hide the backside of the tambour door when it's open. Not to mention the fact that I need something to hold up the shelf that's going to sit behind the tambour. One thing I haven't explained yet is the access to the room that this cabinet is going, and this is always an incredibly important factor to consider when designing a piece of furniture. In order to get to the final location, this cabinet has to go up a switchback style staircase, which is going to make things difficult. So I've designed this cabinet for the legs to come off, so it's smaller, and for as much weight as possible to come off the cabinet for installation. That includes this internal cabinet, which is actually made from walnut veneered MDF for stability. So while I was trying to figure out how to do this, I was looking over the photos from my roll-top desk and realised that I'd already figured this problem out when I was 16. I'm simply going to make the internal cabinet floating. It'll slide inside the main walnut cabinet on some felt and basically just sit there while the external cabinet can expand and contract around it. I guess even after all of this time, the beginner can still teach the professional a thing or two. I mentioned earlier that pre-finishing all the components before assembly would come back to bite me. After years of avoiding it, I decided to give Osmo oil another go, as some recent tests proved it wasn't scratching after fully curing. But the amount of scratching that occurred before it's fully cured is terrible. Normally this wouldn't matter once fully assembled, as the piece can now cure without interference, but because some parts were still in progress, fixing scratches became tedious and time consuming, and left me with a lack of confidence in the finished product, as I wasn't sure if I'd fixed every scratch. I'm not sure if I'll continue to pre-finish cabinets in the future, but if I do, I most likely won't be using Osmo to do it. Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about any finishing issues with the roll-top desk, as due to the lack of setup at school and at home, we were allowed to have the finishing outsourced. So I had my uncle, who's a cabinet maker with a spray booth, to professionally stain and clear coat the desk. And I'm happy to say that the walnut cabinet is now sitting in its new home with some very happy clients. And the roll-top desk, well, that's been sitting in my parents' house for the last 23 years. What started out as an uneventful, simple, and boring project eventually turned into a build that was completely unexpected. A humbling reflection into the past, and it didn't take long to realise that there was nothing simple about this cabinet. This piece, right here, is an accumulation of skills and knowledge that only time and patience can produce. And if it weren't for my younger self starting the journey 23 years ago, then this cabinet wouldn't exist. Understandably, the frustration of the process can lead a beginner to confusion and self-doubt, yet a wealth of knowledge can lead a professional to overconfidence or arrogance, perhaps even a mindset that stops others from achieving their full potential, like I experienced many times as a young woodworker. We all want to get somewhere, yet we tend to forget the journey once we've arrived. Looking back over the photos of my first big project at 16 has truly made me appreciate where I am today, because it's reminded me of where I've come from. And although some of your reactions to this video might be that I'm egotistical or self-indulgent, just know that that wasn't my intention. This is simply just a story that I wanted to share about some pieces that I've built over the years. And I can assure you, I'll never complain about a simple project again, except for drawer boxes. I still hate drawer boxes. Yes, there are a lot of differences between young self and old self, as there should be. A lot has been learnt over the years, but what stood out to me the most were the similarities. I'm still passionate about what I do, and I still love to explore and try new things, and clearly, I still wear a lot of black. No doubt, the future holds many lessons to learn, but what I've learnt today is that even though this cabinet might look like just a piece of furniture, behind those doors is a wealth of knowledge that's been 23 years in the making.